4:28 is the time. We're going to bring in now Greg Hunter from the Gold and Blue News. And Greg, thanks for joining us, first of all. And secondly, I guess we bring you on at the midpoint of spring practice as they're taking the week off. Just give us an overview how it seems to be going right now after that first week of spring practice.
Yeah, 6 practices, under the belt, and another 9 to go. As you said, they're in the midst of spring break at WVU, and that means the football team taking the week off as well. They'll reconvene next week and do the final 3 weeks of spring drills. And so far so good. Obviously, 9 starters back offensively, and they just sort of moving forward with that. All the drama happened last spring with a lot of new players, obviously new coach, new system. All that happened last spring for the offense, and the change around this year in that a lot of the new names, and both in terms of players and coaches, and also the new scheme are on the defensive side. So a lot of attention's being paid to that. And it's probably way too early to, make any real rash judgments in terms of how that's going. But so far, all the players and coaches are saying the right thing, saying, they're getting comfortable with the scheme. It's not that big of a change from last year to this year, out with the old 3-3, 5-odd stack and in with what's going to be a multiple defense, a switch between a 3-4 and a 4-3, depending on the situation. So, it seems to be going well, but obviously we won't know until the fall how well it's really going.
Hey, Greg, I wanted to ask you, I know Dana, he hired a lot of new assistant coaches. How are the players reacting to them out on the field?
Seem to be fine. They're all saying, good things. I guess the proof always comes in the pudding. And having done this long time, I know not to read everything into what the spring quotes are at this point in time, but they seem pretty comfortable. To be honest with you, it's a little bit more laid back than it has been. The Bill Kurlaviches of the world who, was here forever and certainly was a high energy guy, very vociferous. He's gone, and he's in Arizona now, and his replacement, Eric Slaughter, can have some high energy, but he's certainly not nearly as loud. And all the defensive coaches are probably, fit in that same mold. It's a little bit quieter, which seems a little odd when you go down to the defensive end of the field and you don't hear some of the screaming and hollering that you've been used to for, 30 years with a Bill Kurlavich. So that's gone. But the players seem to be adjusting well. They're moving forward. It's a lot of new young guys anyways on the defense, so their experience with the old staff was, only a year or two for most of them, so it's not that big of adjustment for them. Really, the scheme is the biggest adjustment. And the players have said, it's really not that big a deal. There are a few new run fits, a few new terms to learn, but it's not like they're having to reinvent the wheel. It's defense is defense in many ways.
Hey, Greg, we'll talk a little defense right now. One of the guys that I've been reading some on and hearing a lot about has been Josh Francis, and everybody's really happy with what he's done so far in the spring.
Yeah, and he's going to be an important key. And, his position is West Virginia, be it if they're going to use the 3-4, and they're going to use the 3-4. They're going to switch back and forth between the 3-4 and the 4-3. But when they're in the 3-4 look, Josh Francis is going to play what's called the buck linebacker, which is going to be a rush end type of guy. He's a little bit undersized for that. He'd been the perfect role for Bruce Irvin at 6'3", 235, 240. Josh Francis is about 6'1", 210. He's a speed linebacker, runs really well, but he's a very good pass rusher, but he's a tad bit undersized, but he's going to have to play that position. The other guy who's going to factor in there is a guy named Juwan Snow, who's out this spring because of a shoulder injury. He had surgery in the off season. He's also going to be a buck linebacker. Those two guys are going to have to put pressure on the quarterback, and that buck linebacker is going to be the guy that's going to be really the designated rusher in many situations. And obviously moving to the Big 12, a lot of teams that throw the football, if you can't get pressure on the quarterback, you're going to be in a really bad situation. So Josh Francis is going to have to step up. Wasn't a huge factor last year. This year he's got to be as a senior this season.
I know Coach Holgorsen has talked about a couple of other players that have been doing well on the defensive side this spring, Travis Bell and Will Clark, talking about those two guys.
Yeah, Travis Bell's a guy at the free safety position. Looks like he's going to take over for Ian Smith. Now, a little bit different configuration. Instead of 5 safeties, you got 4 in a more traditional set. But Travis Bell got a good bit of experience last year behind Ian Smith in a backup role now. It looks like as a junior he's ready to step in and be a starter. He looks pretty solid, and he looks comfortable. And Will Clark, he's the Julian Miller of this year's defensive line. Last year, Julian Miller was the rock-solid guy. This year, it's got to be Will Clark. He's got the most experience, really, of anybody up front defensively with Clark and Bruce Irvin gone. With Miller and Bruce Irvin now graduated. So Will Clark's got to be the guy. He's looked really good so far this spring, and really his role isn't going to be that different with the change in scheme. He's going to be basically, your defensive end. He's going to move between a 3 technique and a 5 technique at defensive end and defensive tackle. He's got to be solid because there's not much experience around him.
We're talking to Greg Hunter from the Gold and Blue News and talking about West Virginia spring football. Of course, they're taking this week off and enjoying spring break. Let's move and talk a little bit about the offense. And I guess you start with Geno Smith. We know he's the number 1 quarterback, but then you start looking at maybe his backup. And he's had a couple of guys looking at, and of course, the one that I've been reading some on is Ford Childress and the freshman coming in. How is that looking as shaping up for the backup role behind Geno Smith?
It looks like a pretty good situation. Paul Millard returns. Obviously, he was a true freshman last year that was Geno's backup, and he's still there, and he looks solid. But Ford Childress, who's a true freshman, enrolled in January, should still be in high school at this point. Boy, he looks like the real deal. Now, I don't want to start proclaiming him as the next anything just yet because we haven't seen enough of him. But he's big. He's got an incredibly strong arm. Looks to be sounds to be a really smart kid. And talking to him, has a great understanding. His dad was Ray Childress, who was one of the all-time greats in college football as a defensive lineman, and was a long-time pro with the Houston Oilers. So obviously, he's been around the game. He knows the game. He looks like he's the real deal. Now, we haven't even seen him in a scrimmage situation, so I don't want to start throwing too many accolades at him just yet. But just the guy on the hoof. He looks like he's got, all the tools that it's going to take. So, I guess the question is, though, he's got a red shirt available. Do you use that red shirt with him and try to preserve a little bit of his eligibility and let Paul Millard be the backup since Geno's obviously going to get, all the snaps that he can get as the starter? Or do you, push Ford right into the backup role, let him compete with Paul this year, and give him some experience so when he gets ready to, maybe assume the starting position next season, he's got a little bit of playing time under his belt.
Hey, Greg, based on everything you've seen in spring practices, what's the biggest difference you think the fans will see in the spring football game coming up in April?
Well, if you really want the nuances, it's going to be the defense, and some of the defensive schemes. But there's not going to be that big of a difference. Truthfully, I don't think much. You've got a lot of starters back offensively. You've got a little bit more depth at quarterback finally with 3 guys compared to just 2 that they had last year. So I think people want to see the Ford Childresses of the world and some of the young wide receivers like a KJ Myers or a Jordan Thompson, Dante Chambers. So some of those young guys are guys that people are going to want to see. But really, there's not much difference. Like I said, new coaches defensively, some new players defensively, but it's not like it's a whole new world out there. It's just a little bit. You move a safety up, you move a linebacker sometimes the defensive line into the defensive line, and it's not really that big of a difference compared to what they've seen in the past.
What about some of the guys that have come in? We've talked about Ford Childress coming in, should actually still be in school with the early enrollment. Are some of the guys that have done that, they're really stepping out and making some noise early in spring practice?
Yeah, they had 5 of those guys, and all those guys right now, may have a chance to play. Now, a couple of them may have a chance to play because there's just not much in terms of numbers at their positions. Jordan Thompson is a little slot receiver. He's a smaller version of Tavon Austin, 5'7", 170, but very quick. I'm not going to say he's as quick as Tavon, but very quick, very good in open space. He's got a chance because West Virginia doesn't have much depth at the inside receiver position to, be at least a backup in that role. There are a couple other guys. A kid named Amari Alberry is a defensive lineman that made the transition straight out of high school, came in January from Miami. And he's got a chance, again, because the numbers are so thin in the defensive line, that he may have an opportunity to play, which would be the first true freshman defensive lineman that I can remember play at West Virginia in 20, 25 years. So But, again, that's probably need. And then there are a couple other kids. There's a Sean Walters as a safety who's looked really good. Probably more of an opportunity for him to see action in special teams roles than maybe with the defense, but he's a guy that they like a lot as well. And like I said, Fort Childress, of course, gets a lot of attention, and he's got a chance to be really, really good if he continues to progress as we've seen.
Of course, the offensive line will be very key in protecting Geno this year. Josh Jenkins coming back. Give us an update on how that knee injury from last year is progressing and how everything's going with Josh.
Yeah, Josh looks fine. Parkersburg native appears to be, 100% in terms of knee. Now, sort of getting his feet back under him. He spent all of last fall rehabbing and didn't do any practice work with the team. So, I'd say there's a little bit of rust there that he's got to knock off. But, he was a starter for 2 years prior to his injury. So, he's got plenty of game experience. Offensively, this line looks like it's going to be a little bit better just because of experience than last year. I mean, Donnie Barclay's gone, and he was the best offensive lineman that they had last year. But other than that, for the most part, they return everybody else. Mm-hmm. And you take a Quentin Spain, who saw spot duty at both guard and tackle last year, and you're going to plug him in for Donnie Barclay. And, he's got a chance to be really, really good. Just needs to continue to learn what he's doing. But after that, everybody else on this offensive line has been a multi-year starter. So, you hope you're better. Now, your problem is if you have any injuries, you're probably turning to some redshirt freshmen or sophomores as your potential guys to fill in. They have very little experience depth, and I guess that's the worry for West Virginia in the offensive line.